The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents a debate review of Is Islam True? With Matt Dillahunty and Perfect Dawah. This one is wild. Part of me is tempted to go back and do something that I haven't done in ages. I stopped editing in clips from the debate because, one, I wanted to encourage people to watch it. Two, I didn't feel it was necessary to have people relive it. And three, it's all out there, fair, and it would seem like filler in here. I don't want to, here's a 2-minute clip and let's discuss that when we can just say what happened and move on. So I've debated Islam several times, and I'll be debating Islam again here in April at DebateCon 3.1. They've all been very, very, very similar, but not all of the debaters have been equally skilled and knowledgeable. I would say that they've probably gotten worse, but in different ways. Before I went into this debate, I contacted the moderator, the debate organizer, and I said, if I'm going to do this again, if I'm going to debate Is Islam True again, I would like to know exactly what propositions this person is intending to defend. And they got back to me and they said, look, here's what he says. 1, Islam is the last message of God, and there will be no more messages or messengers after the Prophet Muhammad. That's 1. Number 2, Islam cannot be a man-made religion. And number 3, the Quran is infallible. And so when I jotted down my notes for my opening statement, I did what you're supposed to do. I'm there as a debater. I am there to challenge the claims of, in this case, Perfect Dawah, and to say, okay, the subject is Islam true? What do I need to do? I need to talk about what truth is. So my opening started off talking about how do we tell if it's true? Does it comport with reality? That I'm not eliminating the supernatural. The supernatural could be true, but it needs to be demonstrated. I went through all of those aspects, defining truth and talking about how people believe in many things that are not real or true in any demonstrable sense. And you need demonstrable evidence for a proposition, and that's the only path that we know of to showing that something is true. It does not mean that we can prove something is false. And I asked for those specifics, and I got those 3. And then the rest of my opening statement was, I'm going to address the claim that it's the last message or messenger. And it was really simple. My notes were, prove that this is a message from a messenger from a God. Prove that it's the last one. And that this is a ridiculous foundation to take a stand on, because what you're essentially saying is nothing like this will ever happen again. That's like saying the U.S. will never have an openly atheistic president or whatever. All of that was included in my opening. I went through the problems with saying that this is the last message or the last messenger. Number 1 being that you can't show it's a message from a God at all. And I don't know how you could prove that it's the last one. And during the debate, I pointed out that Christians thought their message was going to be the last one. And the Mormons think their message is the last one, perhaps. The second thing I also addressed in my opening was that it cannot be man-made. And I specifically said, I don't know how to do this until after we've had this discussion, because which part of the Bible couldn't be written by a human when our understanding is that all of it was in fact written by a human? And so you're saying that some of this is conceptually beyond a human, and I want to know which thought or idea is beyond a human. And he mentioned some of them. The final section was that the Quran is infallible. And my opening addressed, what does that mean? Does it mean that it's scientifically infallible? Because I can find all these things that are a problem with that. And some of this could be, is it morally infallible? I don't know how we could do that. And I basically point out the Quran hasn't aged well, and that Muhammad would get a failing grade or maybe a D on even the scientific things that they like to point to. That was my opening. That was my plan for this debate. Unfortunately, Perfect Dawah's debate and opening were absolutely terrible. I'm the only one of the two of us that addressed specifically saying, here's the 3 points and here's why. His opening started with a video of people in the 1940s. And he's like, they knew a lot of stuff, but yet they still, I think his argument was, they still look, backward and without modern conveniences. And they know that the earth isn't flat and stuff like that. Can you then imagine 1,400 years before that, how little they knew if in 1948, some people still lived out in the middle of nowhere? That would be like me going out and filming someone who's a farmer now, out there, tilling a garden, and then saying, can you imagine what things were like 1,500 years ago if this is as far as we've gotten? You don't compare the worst of 1948 to 1,400 years ago. You compare the best. Oh, yes, but we're not comparing the best because Muhammad was an illiterate man. There's no way he could know this. And this is the key cornerstone of what they keep coming up with over and over again. His opening kept going, how did he know? How did he know? How did Muhammad know? How did he know? Well, the truth is, he didn't know. You can't show what he knew. You can't show what anyone else knew. You can barely show what he believed. If he believed something and we later confirmed it, that doesn't mean he knew it and saw it before us. That means that he may have believed it, but it was confirmed afterwards. But in the case of the Quran and what Muhammad has said, you can't even do that. What's most frequently happening is that we discover something about reality, and then somebody goes and looks through the Quran and finds a passage that they can respin and reinterpret as if it were knowledge, because what it actually says there is not accurate or edifying. It doesn't teach us anything. And then you also have to ignore all the problems around it. So you've got to cherry pick those out. What I found strange about his opening was that he basically stole C.S. Lewis's liar, lunatic, or Lord trilemma and reframed it as psychopath, charlatan, or prophet. That for all of these, they're either psychopaths, charlatans, or prophets, which is absolutely C.S. Lewis's liar, lunatic, or Lord, unless somebody can show where psychopath, charlatan, and prophets came first. And so what it appears that the Muslim apologists are now doing, because, Muslim apologists are generally worse at apologetics than most Christian apologists. The average Muslim apologist that I've seen and or debated is noticeably, significantly worse than the average Christian apologist. And I think the average Christian apologist is pretty bad at a lot of this stuff too. Ray Comfort looks, far more impressive than most of the Muslim apologists. Not all of them. I'm looking forward to Muslim scholars. I'm not, this isn't just a, trash talk the Muslims. This was a frustrating debate because my opponent was a liberal Muslim who disagreed with the bulk of Muslim scholarship on whether or not Muhammad married Aisha at 6 and consummated at 9. He thinks that's a lie. He thinks the other things that were said were a lie, and that people are using and misusing a religion, and that really what it's all about is God wants to take us from our animal nature in the jungle and turn us and lead us to a utopia. The source of all of our problems is the jungle we're living in, whether it's diabetes or cancer or lack of empathy. It's all about this jungle. And so he thinks that God created us with an animal nature and wants to lead us towards a human nature. There were a lot of key moments in this debate, and I actually took notes so that I could run through them. And I'm going to run through them fairly quickly because, frankly, this is exhausting and boring for this particular debate until we get to the key highlights. First, he believes that there won't be another messenger. Cool, that's one of the 3 things. Because there isn't a need for another messenger. He believes that God wants to give a message and that he believes that Muhammad was the last messenger. And because he believes that Muhammad was the last messenger, he believes there won't be another messenger. This is an absolute tautology that tells us nothing except he believes it. So how does he show that there won't be another messenger? He doesn't. He doesn't even try. He just says that he doesn't believe there will be. He believes we're selfish animals and that all animals are selfish, despite the fact that we know not all animals are selfish in the excessive sense. Everything is selfish in the sense that it has a sense of survival. But I mean, I've seen stories of dolphins saving humans. I've seen other animals that protect their, masters and stuff like that. Oh, but they're just selfish. They're just doing it for food, the dog. But what was the reason for the dolphin to do that? Oh, animals are just selfish. We're all selfish to some extent. And by the way, selfishness isn't necessarily a bad thing. Your survival is a good thing. But to say that we all have an animal nature, okay, fine. I'm fine with the fact that we're all animals. I think we are all animals. Every time I asked him, how do you know that on any of these issues, it just led to another sermon about something he believes with no attempt at explaining why. And if I asked him, for example, if fairness was part of human nature or animal nature, and his response was selfishness is animal nature. But that's not what I asked. I asked about a sense of fairness and whether that was human nature or selfish nature. And his answer is animals are selfish, but they aren't. And they're certainly not merely selfish. So we refuse to answer that question. How do you know that God created us without humanity? He says it's too difficult to explain. Hang on, you're here to debate. You raised a proposition and it's too difficult for you to debate. All right, let's set that one aside. How can you know that God created us as non-human animals? His defense is that he doesn't think we're human now, which blew my mind because he's like, do you think we're human? I'm like, yes. I'm asked a question that has a yes or no answer, and I can give the yes or no answer. And when he's asked, he's like, oh, I don't think we're human. And I said, okay. He's so liberal of a Muslim that not only Muslims disagree with Muslim scholars, he disagrees with all of scientists. So I try to make this case. And I said, if I were to interview all the scientists on the planet, would the overwhelming majority of them agree that we are human beings? He doesn't know. He doesn't know what they'd say. I find that absolutely unbelievable. Perfect Dawah was repeatedly, in my opinion, dishonest in this. Every time I asked a question that was going to put him in a corner, and I did him rapid fire there in that session, his defense was, I don't know. He doesn't know every verse in the Quran. He doesn't have the Quran memorized. We'll get to the Quran in a second, but his whole thing is the source of all the problems is the jungle that we're living in. And he personally, argument from incredulity, cannot believe that an illiterate man 1,400 years ago could have looked at the world and had some sort of idealized utopian vision. Well, I'd say that's an epic failure of imagination. It takes virtually no imagination to think that people of all eras have dreamed of a better world. And so his view that Muhammad was an illiterate man 1,400 years ago who couldn't possibly have thought about, some utopian ideal. How absolutely bizarre. That's his defense, that Islam can't be man-made. His defense for part two, that Islam can't be man-made, is because he can't believe that people thousands of years ago could have imagined an end to the universe. He tries to spin this as how do they know? We've already gone over the fact they don't know. You can't even show that that's necessarily what they believed. But that you want to, because you now are convinced that there's going to be an end to the universe, you think that they knew that and were saying it before the scientists knew it. And then he does something dastardly, but I just want to rehash real quick. There were 3 prongs here he was supposed to defend. None of them did he defend in his opening. Islam is the last message, and there will be no more messengers. Islam cannot be man-made, and the Quran is infallible. On the subject of the last messenger, he believes that there won't be another messenger because there isn't a need for another messenger. And he doesn't believe that God would send another messenger. So his belief that there won't be another messenger, which he can't prove, is just based on his belief that God wouldn't send another messenger. His belief that the Quran can't be man-made is because he can't believe that an illiterate man 1,400 years ago could have had utopian ideas. So for the first two, it's because he just can't believe it. That's his whole defense. I can't believe that 1400 years ago this. I can't believe that this. I can't believe God would send another messenger, therefore that. This person does not understand the basics of a logical argument, doesn't understand the significance of logical fallacies, doesn't understand what should be compelling evidence, does not know how to make a point, does not know how to answer the question that was asked. And for the third part of this, where he's supposed to defend the notion that the Quran is infallible, I asked him if it was possible for me to be a good person. Yes. Is it possible for me to be a good person if I'm also opposed to Islam? Well, there was some hemming and hawing there because he started to recognize that he was about to get trapped. And then I said, well, what if there's something in the Quran that's false? Oh, there's nothing in the Quran that's false. Cool. And then I proceeded to ask him a parade of questions about the Quran. Which forms first, bones or flesh? Well, he's not a scientist. And I said, no. What does the Quran say about which form first? Well, I don't know what the Quran says about that. Well, you're the one saying the Quran's perfect. And if the Quran says whether bones or flesh form first, isn't that something you'd have to know? And then he says, oh, I know. Scientists are talking about that verse. No, they're not. That's so dishonest for you to go from, I'm not a scientist, to I don't know what it says, to I think, to scientists are talking about it. Is there a scientist somewhere who's probably talking about that verse? Yes. Is there any reputable scientist evaluating the Quran to find out what it could possibly have meant about which forms first, bones or flesh? How many types of cattle are there? Well, he doesn't know all the verses in the Quran. He doesn't have it memorized. Okay. Does the Quran say that God created all organisms in pairs? Well, he doesn't know. And I'm like, but doesn't it say that I formed all organisms in pairs? And then he says, some verses were wrongly interpreted. And that's where this debate is over. And that's where, well, this debate was over a long time before this, but this is the end for perfect Dawah. Because it's very clear that this individual is not even being honest with himself. You can't say the Quran is infallible and then say, you don't know the Quran, you'd have to study that, you don't understand it. Well, what you're saying then is that you believe the Quran is infallible even though you don't know it. But when someone walks you through something and then you say, well, some verses were wrongly interpreted, wouldn't that make it fallible? No, that doesn't make it fallible because they're not wrongly translated. They're not incorrect in their original form. They're incorrectly understood. And so now you've set up a situation where what you're saying is, I believe the Quran is infallible because I believe the Quran is infallible. You haven't given any reason why the Quran is infallible. And for everything that somebody presents, which demonstrates a potential flaw with the Quran, you say it's an error in interpretation. It's an error in understanding. It's not an error in the Quran. But the fact of the matter is, if the Quran says that God created all things in pairs, and there are animals that are parthenogenic, that reproduce wholly without, the species is entirely female. There is no pair. There's no pairing required. And that means the Quran is wrong, which means the Quran is fallible. But he can't admit that, even though it's plainly obvious. So instead, he just has to deny reality. So this was a three-front definition or a defense of Islam being true. Islam's the last message and last messenger, no more messengers coming. He believes this because he believes it. He believes it because he doesn't believe that God would send another messenger. He doesn't have any evidence, doesn't have any reasoning, just, I don't believe that we need another messenger, therefore this is the last one, and that's why I believe this is the last messenger. Issue number 2, Islam cannot be a man-made religion. Why do you believe that? Well, because he doesn't believe that 1,400 years ago, someone could have said things that pointed to what he sees as a utopian vision. That means it can't be man-made. It can't be man-made because he doesn't believe that it's man-made. He doesn't believe that it could have been man-made. He believes it says things that were beyond human beings. Really. You must really understand the Quran. What was the third thing again? The Quran is infallible. What about this verse? I don't know. What about this verse? I'm not a scientist. What about this verse? I don't have it all memorized. What about this verse? I think scientists are looking into that. What about this verse? Well, it might have been interpreted incorrectly. The state of affairs of Muslim apologetics is disastrous from what I've seen. Next month, I'll be debating this subject again. Is Islam true? If Islam is true, I'd love to know. But what is wholly unacceptable is a bunch of fallacious arguments and claims that because some illiterate individual is the author, that, oh, he couldn't have known this and he couldn't have known that. And since he seems to have gotten this right in retrospect with our cherry picking and selective interpretation, it must mean that Allah did it. It's patently absurd. I'm going to put together a bingo card. I probably won't, but I should perhaps put together a bingo card with like 1,400 years and a number of other things that have come up in each one of these debates about waters not mixing, which is a lie, about what people could have known or what's a utopia or how the Quran says this or how it says this. But you can go do a Google search. You can go out on YouTube and you can find video after video with all the problems that exist in the Quran. And by the way, I'll say the same thing for this that I said for the Bible. You can go on out there and find all these supposed contradictions in the Bible. And I would say that many, if not most, of the listed contradictions in the Bible are genuinely not contradictions, even though they are problematic. That some of the things that atheists and other people have listed as contradictions in the Bible simply aren't. But some of them are. And the same thing is true for the Quran. When you list all the scientific errors in the Quran or the things that the Quran supposedly got science right on, some of them aren't surprising. Some of them aren't true. Some of them aren't accurate. Don't pretend like, oh, here's a video with 100 things. That means there's 100 things wrong with the Quran. Here's a video with 100 contradictions. That means there's 100 contradictions in the Bible. That's a mistake. But if you go through and look through those, there are some that are definitely a problem and definitely contradictions. And it only takes one. If your view is that the Bible is perfect or that the Quran is perfect, or that your particular interpretation of the Quran or your particular interpretation of the Bible is perfect, you have big problems because they're clearly not perfect when it comes to the evidence. And the only thing you have left to say they're perfect with respect to the mind of God, which you have no access to. And many of you don't seem to have access to your own mind. The number of facts about the Quran where it seemed that he was just simply doing everything in his power to avoid having to address things that he may have been familiar with. I think he expected me to show up and not challenge stuff. And he's such a liberal Muslim that has beliefs that depart from it, that this debate was, I don't know whether there was much value, because there are very few Muslims that are going to agree with him. So I feel like I spent my time engaged in debate on is Islam true with someone who did not defend the stated topic of is Islam true, did not defend the three propositions that they said they were going to defend with anything more than, I believe that's the case, I believe that's the case, and I don't know enough, I'm not a scientist, I don't have it all memorized, I'll have to go and research it and get back to you. It's not what a debate is. If you show up, and in this case, I didn't ask for this debate, he asked for this debate. And an interesting thing happened a couple of times towards the end of this debate where not only was he saying, hey, let me check on that and get back to you, but he was directing people to come watch his post-debate live stream. Is that the reason you challenged me to this debate? I've already had one Muslim who in the middle of the debate suggested that I was too cowardly to post the debate on my own channel, despite the fact that I had an agreement with Modern Day Debates, and I secured permission from James to post that debate on my channel as well. And I know for a fact, not absolute certainty, but I know that that individual just did that because they know my platform is going to get more views than the Modern Day Debates one is. And they want the views. They want the clicks. They want the attention. And it seems that Perfect Dawah, despite being liberal and nicer, also wanted the clicks and the views and the attention, because he sure as hell did not show up prepared to debate the topic at hand or even the specific tenets that he said he was going to defend. So in a few weeks, when I'm up in Dallas at DebateCon 3.1 to debate another Muslim on Is Islam True, you guys should get your bingo cards ready and tune in. Count how many times you hear 1400 years. Count how many times somebody asserts they couldn't have known that. Count how many times you have arguments from personal incredulity. How many fallacies can we get? And then also make a list of any actual evidence that is presented to support the proposition that Islam is true. You put both of those on a virtual scale in your head, and not only is Islam not going to come out as true, it's going to come out as laughably, poorly defended, and absurd. I didn't think apologetics could get much worse than what some Christian apologists have done. I stand corrected. See you next time.